Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from Helsinki. My name is Terhi Melsä, and I'm the CEO of the Fulbright Finland Foundation. On behalf of our foundation, it is my privilege to wish you welcome to the 7th session in our global webinar series on internationalization of higher education in the COVID-19 era. Today, we focus on the new virtual student experience, education, study abroad, and internships. This topic concerns institutions and individuals around the world. And in today's webinar, we too have participants literally from around the globe, from China to Bangladesh, to Zimbabwe, to Peru. Among the 260 registered participants, we have a diverse representation of professionals across the international higher education field, faculty, and also some students. Thank you all for joining us. Your engagement throughout the webinar is important, and we will soon give you suggestions of ways to do that. Our discussion today moves us through time. We will first talk a bit about the time before COVID, then move through the digital shift to what is happening now, and finally, to what the future looks like. We aim to keep it concrete. Institutions all around the world have been discussing virtual environments. But what does it really mean to do virtual education, study abroad, and exchanges? And how do you do it in practice? How do you design online international education experiences that take into account a holistic student experience, from mental well-being to gaining global competencies? Today, we're very pleased to have with us two thought leaders from the field to share and to discuss their insights with us. GianMario Besana is Associate Provost for Global Engagement and Online Learning at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. And Wing-Kai To is Assistant Provost for Global Engagement at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. Welcome, GianMario and Wing-Kai. We are so pleased and grateful to have you both with us. And today's moderator is our foundation's resident internationalization scholar, Assistant Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives, Lisa Weimer. I want to give a big thank you to Lisa and to the foundation's entire events team here in Helsinki. And a special thank you to our partners in this webinar series, the USA Study Abroad Office of the US State Department, and the Association of International Education Administrators. We're absolutely delighted to be working with you. And now I have the very special honor to welcome Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs, Matthew Lusenhaub, to give the opening remarks on behalf of the US State Department. The role and importance of international education and exchanges is critical in today's world, and the commitment from governments, both financially and in terms of policy, enabling mobility, exchanges, and international collaboration in a continuous, sustainable, and predictable manner is so important. Acting Assistant Secretary Lusenhaub, I want to sincerely thank you for your support and for joining us today. We're honored to have you with us.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for that introduction. Thanks to the Fulbright Finland Foundation and the Association of International Education Administrators, our team at the Department of State Study USA Abroad branch, and for everybody for your hard work on this series of webinars, which has engaged hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people around the world and hundreds of educational institutions. At ECA, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, we support thousands of people-to-people exchange programs every year. And of course, this time last year, we had to adjust and shift many of our programs to a virtual environment, as did everyone else who's on this webinar. We've managed to maintain some in-person programs, such as the Fulbright program, We're hoping to resume in-person programs as soon as we possibly can. We're strongly committed to the value of in-person programs and the human interaction that only comes from being there with other people. But we've seen some new and exciting opportunities for programs going forward through the new technology that we've embraced, new ways of designing compelling online international education experiences. We've learned a lot of lessons in the past year on how to do that. Another big development is we've really reinvigorated our emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programs. We certainly value our partnership with all of you, our higher education program, our higher education colleagues, to preserve study abroad opportunities and to safeguard American student mobility. And in doing that, I have to say we have support from the highest levels of the US government for these programs. In his very first speech to the State Department employees, Secretary of State Blinken expressed deep appreciation for how people-to-people exchanges bring our world closer together and convey the best of America to the world, especially to its young people. And certainly a study abroad and Americans, students, undergraduates and graduates present at campuses and institutions around the world are great citizen ambassadors. I myself was one when I studied abroad as an undergraduate at the University of Tunis in Tunisia many years ago. The secretary also gave a speech last week in which he talked about the importance of making foreign policy understandable and relevant to the American public. And certainly everyone who participates and study abroad to learn a new language, to experience a different culture and a different society, they are unofficial citizen ambassadors of the United States when they're overseas, and they help to internationalize their communities when they return home. On diversity and equity and inclusion, President Biden has called on the federal government to affirmatively advance equity, civil rights, racial justice, and equal opportunity. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the core of our partnerships with higher education institutions. ECA has a long history of diversifying American student mobility through programs and partnerships with higher education institutions, including minority serving institutions. And this focus has been part of our efforts with virtual programs as well. The most recent Open Doors survey conducted by the Institute for International Education reported that over 347,000 Americans studied abroad in the academic year before the pandemic, with over 31% representing minorities. That was 2018 and 19, which is up 20% from 10 years ago, but still remains below minority participation rates in US higher education today. So we all need to work to encourage robust growth following the pandemic. And our efforts will require continued partnerships with all of you on programs such as the Gilman program, the Critical Language Scholarship program, and the Fulbright program. To give a couple of examples of how we've used virtual exchange, we adapted the Benjamin Gilman International Scholarship Program to support virtual learning this year. And just a side note, 57% of Gilman scholars are first generation college students, and almost 70% are racial and ethnic minorities, which is far above their representation in national study abroad overall. So we work with a network of over 6,000 institutions, campus advisors supporting roughly 3,000 Gilman scholars. And during the pandemic, we funded participation in virtual exchanges for the first time, which gave students more time to apply their funding and created a support network online for advisors and alumni through virtual workshops and social media engagement. Another program which has shifted to virtual instruction was our Critical Language Scholarship Program, or CLS. That program included all of the key components of our traditional overseas CLS exchange, which teaches an academic year's worth of a foreign language in 8 to 10 weeks. So virtually, we had language instruction, we had language partners, we had cultural enrichment opportunities, and the students earned academic credit. One of our CLS participants described this virtual program as follows. He said, "It was an incredible experience, and I honestly believe that my language skills progressed more during these past 8 weeks than they have through any other classes or programs I have participated in, even in person." This summer, the CLS program will remain virtual, and we hope we can expand into some in-person immersive language programs if possible. But we're always first and foremost concerned with the health and safety of our participants. So we will see where we are with the pandemic as we move into the summer. And through our USA Study Abroad office, which is represented here today, we've continued to provide virtual learning opportunities like this webinar to connect with the higher education community. So today you'll be hearing more from the experts, and I thank them for joining us, focusing on how we can collaborate together on robust virtual and in-person experiences for our students. I hope you can join us for some future webinars on this topic and in this series. And you can follow ECA at State on Twitter to learn about future activities and future opportunities. So with that, I'll turn it back to the moderator, Lisa Weimer. And thank you all again for attending from all over the world and all over the United States. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the warm welcome and introductions. We really appreciate it. I'm Lisa Weimer, the Assistant Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at the Fulbright Finland Foundation. And a big hello, or as we say in Finland, moikka, from a very snowy Helsinki today, to all of you, our friends and colleagues joining us from around the world. The format of today's webinar is discussion-based. And throughout the discussion, you can submit your questions into the Q&A function. So at the bottom of your screen, if you want to find the Q&A icon, and you can see what it looks like. It looks like there's already somebody who has posted a question. And what you can do, this is very interactive, so you can put your thumbs up. There's an icon for your thumbs up. If you like that question, you want that question to be asked to the presenters. And so we will be using that throughout the webinar. So we encourage you to post your questions there. We also have the chat function. So you can find that also at the bottom of your screen if you want to press on that. It looks like some of you have already been using that. The trick with this is that at the bottom of it, you want to make sure that you are sending the message to all attendees and panelists. So if you haven't said hello in the chat function, you can do that now. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website after the event. And we also encourage you, if you're on Twitter, to use the hashtag IntelledC19 if you'd like to join the conversation. Now, let's go ahead and dive into the discussion with our speakers. To set the stage, I would like to give you both the opportunity to share the context of virtual international education at your institutions. So to get us started, GianMario, can you tell us a little bit about the virtual international education experiences that DePaul University was offering prior to COVID-19?
Sure, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the Finland Fulbright Foundation for this opportunity to think together about the virtual aspect of what we do in international education. And it's a great pleasure to be here with Wing-Kai, who has become a good colleague and friend over the years. So for the people who don't know DePaul is a private institution located in Chicago, very urban, about 20,000 students, a third of which are first-generation college students, very diverse population, and our mission students are typically on the middle to lower end of the socioeconomic scale. So increasing access and fostering equity in access to international education, transformative experiences has always been a priority for us. And this is what brought us already in 2013 to start our largest initiative in virtual international education, which was the implementation of a university-wide virtual exchange collaborative online international learning initiative. So COIL for short, collaborative online international learning, is a pedagogy that puts in contact a class happening, in my case, at DePaul, with a class happening at a partner institution around the world, with the goal of having students collaborating in mixed teams on a specific project. So Lisa made sure that we would define terms, so I'm trying to define the term particularly for the people who may not be familiar with this. We're not talking about inviting professors from a partner institution to lecture to your students. We're talking about structuring collaborative projects where students at your institution work with students at a partner institution, obviously in a virtual format because the students are geographically separated. We started this in 2013, and since then we've done about 250 or so courses with the COIL component. And our main motivation was exactly expanding access and fostering equity to access to international transformative experience. And it's been, if I may say so, so refreshing to hear the Assistant Secretary talking about the renewed attention of the current US administration on diversity, equity, and inclusion related to international education that is so crucial. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a set of examples of projects of virtual exchange that we did at DePaul, so that you can get a little bit of a more concrete idea of what we are talking about. So that was our major virtual effort before the pandemic. Other minor things, we had virtualized the pre-arrival portion of the orientation program for new international students. So we created a series of modules that students could attend in our learning management system. And maybe it's important for me to mention also that at DePaul, pre-pandemic, about 15%, of our credit hours were offered fully online in primarily an asynchronous format on our learning management system. So that was pretty much the spread of our virtual international education efforts pre-pandemic. We had no targeted study abroad specific opportunities in virtual format before the pandemic, or no global virtual internship as well pre-pandemic. Always happy to talk more about COIL and virtual exchange examples if people are interested. Winkai?
Thank you, GianMario. I also like to thank the Fulbright Finland Foundation and the Department of State USA Study Abroad and AIEA for organizing this series of webinars and inviting both of us to participate today. This is quite an honor for me to sit together with GianMario, as you have heard, who has been leading the efforts at DePaul University for over 7 years. And as a SIO of the Bridgewater State University, we are relatively new to starting virtual exchange. And I think what we've been doing this year is more than what we did over the last 10 years. Like most of the institutions in the United States, before the pandemic, our focus has been more for traditional study abroad and student mobility. And obviously, we have a number of study abroad courses and programs in our institution, both for faculty-led courses and also for semester abroad. COIL was not implemented on our campus before 2019, before the pandemic, although I was fully aware of the SUNY COIL network and DePaul University and many other communities that have been doing this work. So, but this year we have to pivot to do a lot of different types of virtual engagement experiences. I think I'm here to offer another perspective from an institution that has recently pivoted to virtual exchange, and what are some of the issues we are facing, and what are some of the practical problems we are also encountering as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That gives us good context for the rest of our discussion. So, GianMario, it sounds like your institution started early. So your institution is a bit of an aspirational institution of what we can all look towards as we make this pivot. And Wing-Kai, I think you bring a really valuable perspective, because I would imagine that there's many institutions out there that were forced to do this Corona pivot. So I'm curious to follow up with Wing-Kai, what lessons were learned as you made the pivot to a more virtual existence?
Thank you, Lisa. I think we are all learning this year, and I can't imagine it's been 1 year since the pandemic in March. And I still remember we were trying to help students from coming back from study abroad in March, especially in Italy, in South Korea, in Spain, in many other European countries. And I still, our concern at that time was really trying to think about how to take care of our students. But I think, the lesson this year is that you cannot just sit still and try to wait until the pandemic is over to have student mobility again. You just have to learn about other things you can do in international education that's out there for all the institutions to adapt to the realities. So what we did was that we really tried to take advantage of the resources provided by my colleagues, at AIEA and other associations in the United States that try to talk about how to do virtual exchange better. So I think some of the lessons we can learn is that we really need to have strong leadership, and also a commitment from the institutions to change, to shift to a new model of study abroad and a new model of global learning. I think that leadership is very important. And the other point is that it's also very important to have collaborations with the partnerships each of us has all over the world. As GianMario said, COIL is a shared learning platform for our classes in different countries to work together, so students and faculty can work together. So we have to utilize our own partnership to develop COIL. So I think that's also very important to keep in mind when you think about how to start virtual exchange. So I think the support of the institution and to have the leadership to be behind supporting virtual exchanges, to try to allocate some resources and ask the staff to think about new ways of engaging students, both in advising and also in programming. So I think these are some of the things that we try to do this year.
Yeah, and I think that COIL seems to keep coming up. And I actually see in the chat here that there's someone from a university in Japan, in Osaka City, who is also involved in one of these COIL initiatives. So it's good to see that it's growing and it's moving around the world here. So I'm curious to go back, GianMario, it's quite interesting that you started before Corona, right? So I'm curious to hear from you. You said this was a university-wide initiative. So how did you get buy-in? And also, I'm really curious, where does this belong? So does this belong in the international office or in instructional design, or where is its home, and who's really kind of been the champion of pushing this forward?
Right, thank you. These are great questions. On the buy-in question, some of the people in the audience who've heard me speak about virtual exchange implementation before have probably heard me say this, but I never get tired of saying it. The key initial step is to make sure that you have a very clear articulation of why your institution wants to do COIL or virtual exchange. If it's simply because we're in the middle of the pandemic and you see this as an alternative to traditional mobility, this is not going to go very far, in my opinion. You need a clear strategic narrative around why your institution is engaging in this. And it doesn't have to be super sophisticated. I mean, I basically already articulated our narrative is access and equity. When only 4 or 5% of your students have access to traditional mobility for a number of reasons, what about the other 95% of your students? It behooves you to expand opportunities. Once you wrap this motivation and you can articulate it very clearly and connect it with the ethos of your institution, and even more potentially successfully with current strategic priorities of your institution strategic plan, then it becomes relatively easy to get buy-in from, and when we say buy-in, obviously buy-in to implement virtual exchange has a multiplicity of stakeholders as object of the buy-in. You need buy-in from upper leadership because you need resources. You need buy-in from the faculty, from the professors who need to implement this. You need buy-in from students, and you need buy-in from allies on campus, and Winkai alluded to this, that may not be your traditional allies. International education professionals in the past, pre-pandemic, have rarely interacted, for instance, with instructional designers or information technology specialists on your campuses. Yes, we all had to implement, either Teradata or another system to support study abroad. So we had to interact with the IT folks, but typically the IT folks are not our best friends. Well, if you want to do virtual exchange, well, they have to become your best friends. So again, there's a multiplicity of stakeholders that need to be involved in the buy-in process. On your second question, Lisa, on where does this belong, in my experience, in the vast majority of institutions that have launched virtual exchange as a campus-wide initiative, it has always started in the International Office of Global Engagement Office. And the SIO, typically the senior international officer, the person who's responsible for the international affairs and engagement institution, has typically been the engine around these initiatives. What we're seeing now is this new phenomenon that inside the International Office and the Global Engagement Office, now in several institutions, the professionals from education abroad are approaching this virtual opportunities, and that hasn't been the case at the beginning. At DePaul, for example, we have a separate office as part of the global engagement that does virtual exchange that had no connection, no direct connection with the study abroad team. But if I may talk about a little bit about the pivoting that we did, given that in our case, virtual exchange was already up and going, we did not have to devote resources and energy to implement virtual exchange. Instead, my study abroad team and the rest of the global engagement team tried to creatively address the virtualization of different experiences, different from COIL. For example, some of our short-term faculty-led study abroad programs shifted to virtual, in this case, initially as an emergency situation, as a response to the pandemic. So we ended up running a number of short-term faculty-led virtual study abroad programs. Now, with the pandemic not yet behind us, but certainly in a very different situation, we have faculty coming to us and asking again for the opportunity of running virtual programs, as some of them are beginning to plan for future traditional mobility, but the virtual programming is definitely here to stay. I'm going to put another link in the chat maybe that will lead you to a page where you can see two, for example, of our upcoming program. One is called Animated in France. It's for animation students that will get to attend a virtual animation festival in Annecy, and we'll have the opportunity to interact with animation firms in France. The other one is a program on Poland and the Czech Republic seen through the lenses of the Holocaust and theater. Fascinating program. They will attend a virtual art festival in Krakow, and again, they will get to interact with theater troops in both Poland and the Czech Republic. So that was one virtualization that happened side by side to virtual exchange. But then we also created a different kind of program that we call Virtual Global Studies. And I think these are ideas that we've all been struggling with, right? How do you virtualize these experiences? And besides the more traditional study abroad type of experience, our version of Virtual Global Studies instead targets existing courses. Let's say you have a professor who's teaching a marketing course, and they want to give an international spin and an international piece of content to that course, bringing in the possibility of having synchronous experiences for the students with firms or experts in a different country. I'm going to pause and distill what I think is the fundamental lesson for me from the pandemic. And the lesson is that lack of co-location does not mean lack of collaboration. So the fact that you cannot go to Japan and be in the same room with startups that have innovative marketing strategies does not mean that you cannot expose your students to this. And faculty have realized that with the new technology, you can infuse curriculum with international perspectives a lot more easily than we thought possible in the past. So we have virtual exchange, we have what we sort of call virtual study abroad, and then we have virtual global studies. That is, are these targeted enrichment of existing courses with international content. And then one last thing that we ended up doing was we call global conversations, and these are, again, taking advantage of the same intuition that co-location does not prevent collaboration. We structured 90 minutes synchronous conversations around topics related to the pandemic, at least for the first two editions, facilitated by teams of faculty, some from DePaul, some from over 25 partner institutions around the world, open to students of all our partner institutions who can come and for 90 minutes have the opportunity to discuss in a forum that now has students from the US, India, Brazil, Botswana, Europe, all in the same Zoom room talking about the different aspects of the same experience. This is something that 2 years ago, if I asked one of my faculty members, do you want to facilitate a conversation with students from 15 countries? They would look at me like, what? Where do I go, right? And now we have this clear perception that an experience that this is actually possible. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a good point that, the COVID has kind of awakened, if you want to call it that, this awareness of what a tool online learning can be. I mean, there's also some challenges. We'll get to that a little bit later, but it's quite interesting, GianMario, how you talk about you were an early adopter, but now even with the COVID, the pandemic, things have even further evolved. So I want to give Wing Kai an opportunity. because I think that these practical examples are so good to give our audience kind of an idea of what's happening out there. Wing-Kai, do you have any other examples? I mean, I know that you've talked a lot about, you know, making the pivot during this Corona time to more online international education experiences. So do you have any unique examples that you want to share?
Lisa, there are a lot of examples at Bridgewater State University this year, actually. So I'll just highlight a few of them. I think GianMario highlighted virtual study abroad and global conversations, and in addition to their long-standing practice for COIL. We try to do all these things as well, and in addition, also virtual internships. I think virtual study abroad is really a new phenomenon for us to think about how we can pivot to the virtual space for our traditional students who cannot, you know, go abroad. I think it really widens participation for students who were otherwise not able to go to other countries. So we try to organize a few opportunities for them to go study abroad. So we, on the one hand, we partner with our existing university partnerships in South Korea and in Japan. And we joined we are part of the IIGE network at Kansai University with and also the UMAP system in Japan. So we participated, some of our students participated in the summer school, online summer school for the UN SDG project. And over there, they met students from all over the world and to learn about some of the issues of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that's part of the opportunities for our students to meet students from all over the world. More specifically, we have very specific COIL courses relating to Japan and South Korea this year. Thanks to a grant from the American Council on Education, we were one of the institutions that were awarded summer grants to do rapid response COIL. I think there were about 10 universities in the US that partner with Japanese universities. And we are one of those institutions. And one of the courses is about physical education. This is built on a long-standing partnership between our faculty and our partner university in Tokyo. And they work together and connect their students to study physical education in the school curriculum. So it was a full-fledged 6 to 8 weeks COIL experience. Students really work together to do project-based learning and talk about how physical education is taught in Japan versus the United States. They co-produced some videos and also some presentations at the end. They met both synchronously together, very late at night in the US and early in Japan. And also, they also met asynchronously outside the classes. We also have another faculty member who did a COIL with South Korea, with Yonsei University. They're doing a presidential debates about, the debates about the US election, and also about the differences between a presidential system versus a parliamentary system. So they're talking about the political system over there. So those are just two COIL examples, but I do want to highlight one thing that hasn't been talked about is the virtual internships. Before the pandemic, we didn't allow students to do virtual internships because it's, if you can go abroad to do physical internships, why would you do a virtual internships? And people are very skeptical about that. But because of the pandemic, even internships in the United States is done virtually. So it really opens up the door for our students. So our students actually join a few provider programs, CIS, API, and ISA, and going to many different countries, like, working with companies in all over the world, like Ecuador, Dubai, Thailand, Spain, Ireland, Australia, and so on. So these are new opportunities for our students to do summer and fall semester and spring semester internships as well. And finally, just a very brief point about global conversations. I think it's very important for us to actually think creatively how faculty can incorporate and global content and internationalize their curriculum more effectively during the pandemic. And using the virtual platform, more faculty are actually engaging with global issues by bringing those webinars and conversations or panel discussions into their classrooms. So for example, we have a Canadian studies professor who collaborated with 2 other universities and did a series about social justice in Canada and the United States, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about anti-Blackness and anti-racism, comparing the experiences of both countries. So you could actually think about that, this year has led us to think about a lot of issues about equity and social justice. We are also having conversations about the global situation about equity as well. So those are examples that I can bring up.
Lisa, if you can jump in for a second. I'm grateful to Winkai for mentioning virtual internship that has been a successful phenomenon at DePaul as well. In our case, we partner with our long-standing study abroad partner CEA, who offered us the opportunity to offer virtual internship that have been extraordinarily successful for our students. And I think this gives us the opportunity to, if I may, step out a little bit from the details here and think again in slightly more broad terms. Think about what are the learning outcomes of the experiences that we want to offer to our students. In the new world, in the new post-pandemic world, I think that virtual global collaboration skills are going to be essential. We all have to struggle to learn how to collaborate virtually, in some cases in a culturally homogeneous setting, but some subset of the corporate world was dealing with this even before the pandemic, right? In the information technology space, for example, co-location had gone out the window years ago. Software development teams were working across time zones and across geographic zones, collaborating with one another. So our students need to acquire virtual intercultural collaboration skills, and virtual internships are a great opportunity to do this on top of COIL, obviously, who's probably the queen of, or king, I don't know the gender of COIL, of methodologies and pedagogies to foster the acquisition of these skills.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's so interesting to hear, what's actually happening out there in the field, especially those who are kind of coming to this and really thinking about the future and what this could be. So it's not just the Corona pivot. Maybe there will be something that happens after the pandemic as well. What I'd like to do now is kind of shift, and I want to hear from our participants. So we have a poll that we are going to launch, and the poll has now popped up on your screen. So if everyone can answer this question, it is a multiple choice, so you can select as many as you see that work with your institution. What kind of virtual programming in international education have you implemented at your institution? If you're a student and you don't know all of them, just click what you know and what you've experienced. And then we can look at the results and have both of the speakers do some reflection on the results. So I will give you a few more seconds to select your answers. And here we have it. So it looks like the virtual courses and programs for international students is the highest, 64%. Then we have global internships, virtual global internships at 52, collaborative online international learning, COIL, virtual exchange, and then virtual study abroad. So what do you think of these results? Do you have any, are you surprised by this? What do you think?
I think it shows that only half of the participants utilizing the virtual space for some of the study abroad and global learning opportunities. So it's still a new thing for most of the institutions in the United States. But I also realized that there's a higher percentage for supporting our students, whether it's domestic students or international students, because I think a lot of our American students, our own students are international students as well. They also participate in our study abroad, or they located abroad because of the situation that whether they're in the country or outside the country, they also need the virtual connection. So I think when we think about these virtual study abroad courses and opportunities, they are open up to all the students, and whether they are located here or actually back in their own country that could not come back to study. So I'm not surprised that we have a little bit more programs for students or supported services. But in terms of the percentage of COIL, I think it really highlights that before the pandemic, probably you would not have half of the institutions who have done COIL. I think GianMario can tell you that probably he would have the percentage about what's the percentage of institutions actually implemented COIL before the pandemic. But now you got at least half of the institutions who said that they've done some of those. So it really, I think the percentage will go up in the next few years as well.
And are you surprised that this virtual courses and programs for international students is the highest?
I'm not surprised, because I think it's the probably least intentional, in the sense that we went online for everybody, so for international students as well, depending how the audience interpreted the question. But I think that was just a result of what happened. While implementing virtual study abroad programs or COIL, those are slightly more intentional activities from the Global Engagement Office, and so I'm not surprised to see slightly less. But I am surprised. Maybe that's a self-selection bias of the audience of this webinar, that that high percentage of COIL practitioners, because as Wing-Kai said, before the pandemic, the number was not that great. But yes, institutions have approached this. Lisa, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer one question that has come up repeatedly. I'm trying to monitor a little bit of the Q&A in the chat, and it's about cost to students for these experiences. And I can only give you my experience at DePaul. We do not charge any extra fees to students to participate in COIL courses. And as a strategic decision, up to now, we've also not charged any extra fees to students to participate in virtual study abroad opportunities. I know that the first decision on COIL is sustainable. I don't know if the virtual study abroad no fee is sustainable, because it will depend on how, and virtual global studies as well, how much they scale up. And I don't have yet a clear sense of what an average cost of a virtual study abroad opportunity is. While I know pretty well what a COIL course costs to the institution, but I don't know yet enough about the study abroad to make a permanent decision. But at the moment, even the virtual study abroad and the virtual global studies do not have fees for students to attend.
Great, thank you for asking that question. And I do see that there are some questions in the Q&A, and we will be getting to those in a second. There's one up top here that I want to get to. I want to move to, practical tips. So we're now all in this virtual world, and I'm curious to hear from you, and I'm going to pitch this one to Wing-Kai first. Looking at the nuts and bolts, how do you design online international education experiences that take into account this holistic student experience for students. So that's everything from mental well-being to gaining global competencies. So do you have, just nuts and bolts, practical tips? How do you do this, especially coming from the international, if you're coming from international office or someone outside of, the academics who are actually the ones who are teaching these courses, right? How do you do all of this?
Lisa, this is a big question that everyone in higher education is dealing with this year, is to think about the merits and potential difficulties of online learning and remote learning. And it also applies to especially to international education. I think, you mentioned mental health of our students and whether they actually, prefer virtual learning or they prefer actually to be able to travel. And obviously, if you ask them, they would say, I would prefer that I can actually go abroad and get on a plane and go to another country again. And make no mistake, we're not saying that this is an alternative to, but this is also complementary to, study abroad. So I think for it's hard to say what tips we can give, practitioners, but I think we need to think about a few issues when we design online educational experiences. One is as GianMario said, we have to think about the learning outcomes and what's the goals of, designing these kinds of collaborations. Are they for enhancing the cross-cultural communication skills or intercultural skills or language skills? Are they for learning the discipline, the content information by collaborating with other folks across the world? Are they for students to actually gain some intercultural skills and actually language skills, or taking in a new perspective, or thinking about global issues that they have not encountered before? So all these are reasons behind why you do this global learning, in the United States and around the world. I think we need to think about how to make it easier for students. They have lots of demands already from their host institutions for classes. And if one of the classes or two of their classes have some core elements, they have to allocate additional time for asynchronous meetings with other students, or they should be scheduled at a time that would be possible for them to do synchronous learning, not getting up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., but try to really do it at a time that is equitable to both sides. One in the morning or afternoon, the other one in the evening, but not in the middle of the night. So we need to think about time zone. We need to think about workload. Are you doing more just for the sake of doing more? Are you doing things that are meaningful to the learning of the courses? So I think those are important issues when you think about COIL. In terms of deciding on a virtual study abroad, whether you design it in your own university, or you try to participate in a virtual study abroad program offered by your partner university, you have to communicate to your students about, what this virtual experience is about. For instance, we have students who participate in a global culture virtual study abroad in South Korea. So we have two students who have very different experiences. One student had already taken Korean in our own institution. So when they joined the virtual study abroad and Korean language classes, they met other students who didn't speak English as their first language. So most of the introductory teaching was mostly in Korean. So the students who had taken Korean feel that they were doing better. They liked the course more, and versus the students who had never had taken Korean, and then the student didn't feel that was that helpful. So in advising students or supporting students, we have to find them the right program as well, and try to make sure that they're also getting the best out of it. In the end, I think it's really important to think about why are we trying to bring people together and students together to work on global problems and global issues. We have to think about these kinds of learning outcomes.
Really
Lisa,
good practical tips. Good. GianMario, do you want to go ahead? You have something?
Yeah, just one quick thing that particularly related to the mental health aspect, but also the preparation of students for these experiences. I think this is what the community of education abroad professionals can bring to the virtual experiences, where maybe the professors or the instructional designers or the more tech-oriented people who are involved in helping to implement this may not be as well prepared. Because today we talked about a number of different experiences, right? But focusing on the virtual exchange coil type of participation, this can be very challenging intercultural experiences for the students, where issues of identity and all sorts of delicate, difficult conversations and situations that typically we prepare students who are going to go physically abroad, but can also encounter in the virtual space. And I think we need to find a way to leverage the expertise of the education abroad community and infuse it into these experiences as well.
Okay, great. There's one question here that's been asked by a participant that I'd like to go to, because we're talking about these practical tips, and I think this is a really good question. Can you talk a little bit about the technical support that goes on behind the scenes to make these partnerships and collaborations so successful? For example, in addition to the professors and students participating in the project, what kind of tech support do you have during the project and even after? So,
right. So in our case, sure. In our case, our professor who enter the virtual exchange space have an instructional designer assigned to them from our Center for Teaching and Learning, who works with them in finding the right technology for the learning outcomes of their experience, and then supports them throughout the experience. I'd like to add that, when we started, for the first 3 or 4 years, technology was a huge piece of the entire discussion around virtual exchange, and also of the training of the faculty members. Post-pandemic, that's no longer really, honestly, at the forefront. I mean, I know it's hard for all of us to imagine, but in 2015, we needed to explain to a faculty member what Zoom was at the time, and what the potential of Zoom was, and how to use Zoom, and being there to make sure that the synchronous connection was working. Now we don't need to do that anymore. I mean, the pandemic has forced 95% of my faculty to become pseudo tech expert in running a Zoom meeting. So it has, technology and technological support has lost primacy, thank God, because it was never the primary focus of COIL and virtual exchange, because it was the pedagogy and the student experience. So I wouldn't worry too much, to be honest. And yeah, minimal support, yes, you need it, but it's no longer as crucial as it was at the beginning in our experience.
Okay, we're coming to the end, but I have 2 pressing questions that I really want to ask both of you. So if you can answer these briefly, that would be great. The first one is, what do you say to the naysayers? So those who are critical of this virtual experience and are worried that technology is replacing these very valuable face-to-face experiences of study abroad and these sorts of things. And within this, of course, there are issues with Zoom fatigue, which we've all experienced, right? There's this lack of deep relationship building and intercultural experiences. So you can't really taste or smell or, experience this different culture physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And then there's the digital divide. So we still have around the world, there may be lack of equipment, there may be lack of bandwidth, there may be even just lack of physical space to really focus on a virtual experience. So thoughts, what do you say to these naysayers? What do you think about this?
If I can start, I think these are really important challenges, as great challenges for us to think about, how we help our students to navigate about some of the difficult issues they are facing. As a student in the United States, most of us teaching first generation low income students along with middle class students in our institutions. I think it really depends on a lot of institutions that actually have different kind of economic conditions, and their students would approach study abroad a little bit differently. For an institution that have 50% or 75% of their students who study abroad, they obviously want to really focus on traditional student mobility. And they would really be a little bit hesitant about the virtual exchange, and they also think that that's not the same as going abroad. On the other hand, for our students, really, our study abroad number is only 5% of our institution, and only 5% of our students typically can take advantage of traditional student mobility. I think virtual exchange has opened door and widened participation for students to at least to have the exposure to international experiences that they otherwise would not have. Most of our students would take 1 or 2 classes about global studies as the general education curriculum, or they might have attended a lecture or two by a guest speaker who visited our campus. But very few times they could actually meet students from all over the world if they are not in a COIL classroom. So I do think that, the study abroad and COIL gives students more opportunities to interact with citizens in the world and develop cross-cultural communication skills and teamwork for problem solving and other issues. And I think this is really important. So I think students do appreciate that. They might feel that they're a little tired here, but some of our students actually get up in the middle of the night and actually try to talk to students from the other side of the world. So I do think that there's a lot of, values, as we all say, in these opportunities for students to be able to meet citizens of the world and work with them on a day-to-day basis, during the semester.
And GianMario, kind of, I want to give you an opportunity also to respond to this, but kind of a follow-up question to this. And this was a question from one of the registrants. So as they registered for this webinar, they put this question in. And it's, how do you recommend we avoid making virtual programming a second-class experience for students who can't afford to go abroad?
Right. And actually, my answer is the same to both questions. The narrative is not about either or, but the narrative is about and, but for different purposes. What is immersive traditional mobility good for? And what is virtual exchange COIL good for? And what is virtual study abroad good for? If you think carefully, they have obviously an intersection of learning outcomes that are all in the intercultural competence sphere, but then each of these type of programming have a specialized set of learning outcomes that you cannot achieve with the other modalities. So it's a matter of articulating very clearly why you want to do certain things, what the learning outcomes are, and then very clearly have the message out to both the faculty and the students that this kind of programming hits these learning outcomes, and this kind of programming hit these learning outcomes. So again, on virtual digital collaboration skills, well, traditional study abroad is not going to give you that. On the other hand, prolonged immersion in a different culture, a different language, well, COIL is not going to give you that. But collaboration, intense collaboration with students of a different cultural framework on a specific disciplinary content, yeah, sometimes term long study abroad can offer that, but short-term faculty-led study abroad trips don't offer you that. So be very intentional and very specific about what each type of programming can achieve for the students. And this eliminates the first class, second class, best, worst. They're just different, and they address different learning outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really good point. So here in Europe, we have this idea of internationalization at home. And it's really this idea of infusing these international dimensions into curriculum. So, I think this is a perfect way to do it, right? I mean, exactly what you're talking about. So giving those students that probably wouldn't even consider going to study abroad and giving those opportunities to them in the classroom. So I think that there is a different way to look at it. So thank you for answering that one. We could continue this conversation for hours, I think, but unfortunately our time is ending. And I'd like to ask one final question to both of our speakers. If you could briefly answer in a minute or two. GianMario, I will pass this question to you first. What are your thoughts on the future of international education, especially now that we've all had this taste of this online experience and using Zoom? What will international education look like post-COVID in 5 years?
I think it will look like a beautiful mixture of traditional physical mobility, which will come back, and virtual opportunities. I just saw a comment on John Fowler in the chat, and he's exactly right. Virtual components can enrich traditional mobility with pre-experiences, with during experiences. So my vision is a beautiful mixture of intentionally planned experiences, both in person and virtual, is ahead of us.
That's a nice visual. Wing Kai?
Yeah, I think the combination of both experiences by intentionally incorporating a virtual element to study abroad in the future, to do more virtual orientations before the students go abroad, and do more virtual meetings and webinars during the experiences, and also do more reflections after they come back. So I do feel that traditional study abroad is going to be changed, in the next few years with the pandemic, given that we all learned that how easy we can actually connect with folks around the world and the locations that students are going. And I also see that there are opportunities for, how virtual exchanges change our faculty's understanding of study abroad and global learning. So in the past, a lot of faculty are reluctant to do that because they don't have time to travel to another country or to take a faculty-led travel experience. But on the other hand, with the COIL and with other virtual study abroad experiences, they can actually be a part of that without actually leaving their families and other obligations by traveling with the students. So I think those are very important. And finally, the last point I'd like to make is that some folks mentioned the future of virtual internships. I do hope that this will still continue, and in the future, even though more people would really want to just work in a physical locations, I hope that there will still be virtual internships available for some students who cannot actually leave the United States for 4 months or 5 months, but still get an international working experience. And I think you need the internship office and the career office to be your partners to support students. And we do give financial support for students to have internship experiences.
Great. A sincere thank you to both of you, Assistant Provost for Global Engagement at Bridgewater State University, Wing Kai To, and Associate Provost for Global Engagement and Online Learning at DePaul University, GianMario, Besana, thank you both. It was a really, really insightful conversation. And also, thank you for offering your candid perspectives and giving tangible takeaways. I hope everyone is leaving with some food for thought. And I think, a few things that I jotted down here as far as summarizing some of the main points. GianMario, you had started off by saying that really what you need is a clear strategic narrative with your higher education institution strategy. So really looking at your institutional strategy and seeing how you can align with that. I think that's a really good tip. And then Wing Kai, you offered some very practical tips as well. Really thinking through the learning outcomes and the goals of designing these collaborations. What do you want to accomplish? And so I'm going to leave it there. And before we sign off, we'd like to invite all of the participants to our next webinar in our series. And we have 3 more before we wrap up the series. So you still have an opportunity to join us. We will be talking about strategic partnerships, the last 3 of them. So please sign up. And before we sign off, we'd like to, registration is now open for the April 15th webinar. And we will send you a follow-up email that includes the recording of this webinar and also an invitation to the next webinars. Also, please take a moment to fill out the quick 3-question exit survey that will pop up on your screen when you press the leave button. Your feedback is really helpful for us as we design the future webinars. And finally, on behalf of the Fulbright Finland Foundation, as well as the collaborating team at the Department of State's USA Study Abroad branch and AIEA, we thank you for joining us. Have a great day, and sending you all healthy vibes from our winter wonderland here in Helsinki. Have a great day.